welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to have a look at creating animatics in Photoshop. And while we can use other software like Adobe After Effects for creating very intricate and complex animations, I have found a really interesting way and created a technique for developing storyboards and animatics using entirely Photoshop, which does have the capabilities for doing everything from basic animation to video editing and even sound. So this keeps everything in Photoshop itself, and it also allows us the ability to do some really amazing edits to our animatics for this. A couple of things to keep an eye on is your file sizing of this as we go through. As our documents get more and more complex, you might find your computer will start struggling, and this is due to image sizes and stuff like that. So we do need to keep an eye on that, and we're going to hit that issue straight away by creating a new document. So I'm going to go jump in straight away, File, New, and up the top here we do have an option of some presets. So one of the first questions you should always ask is, what format are we going to be shooting in? So I'm going to go film and video for this, and I'm going to start off with HD TV 1080p. There's a whole lot of other presets here that you can choose from, but I'm not actually going to be using this resolution. So if you look over here, we can see there is our resolution, 1920 by 1080, 72 pixels per inch, and that's all well and good, but I actually want to lessen this. So I'm going to use my own custom one. I'm going to keep the aspect ratio the same, so 16 by 9, and I'm going to knock this down to about 960 pixels wide by 640. Now this should keep my 16 by 9 ratio. I'm just going with a lower resolution, so instead of 1920 by 1080 I'm going 960 by 680. It's just going to reduce it down a little bit more, and I'm going to hit create. And here's our document here. You'll notice I've cleaned up my workspace a little bit. Our main focus is going to be on our layers over here at the moment. One of the things you're going to notice as well is that we have some guidelines already built in. This is for our screen safe and title safe. It is here by default, and you'll notice up on the top and on the side we have our rulers. Now if you're not seeing those, you can go Command or Control R and that will bring those up. You can also find them in View and Rulers, and I'm going to actually get rid of these screen safe and title safe, and I'm going to do that just by going to View and go to Clear Guides, and that will get rid of those. The other way is to use your Move tool, V, and then you can literally just drag those off back into the top and left rulers like that. So View, Clear Guides, gets rid of all of those, and this next step is really important to do. It will help us out later on. Is I need to bring back, so I'm going to go to the rulers here and drag down and drop a ruler in on the top, the left, and the right and the bottom. So I'm essentially framing my canvas using these guides. Now, one of the things I also want to mention here is that I currently have snap off. If I have snap on, it will actually try and really just snap those lines to my guide. It makes it a lot easier for this step. But what you want to make sure is once you've done that is do turn snap off. And the main reason for that is it will affect your drawing. So if I put in a guide here, for example, I'm just going to go grab myself a brush, and what you'll find is as I start drawing, you'll notice these little divots will appear, and you can see even as I try and circle them, and this is essentially because the brush is trying to attach itself or snap to that guide. So I'm going to get rid of that guide. I just want the guides on the outside, and I want to turn snap off. Alright, so this is our document. It's almost ready to go. Now what we want to do is we actually want to set up our timeline for this as well. So because it's an animatic, it needs to have a timeline, and I'm going to go to Window and go down to Timeline right at the bottom here, activate that, and this will bring up our video timeline area. Now, we don't actually have a timeline at the moment, so I'm just going to go create video timeline. I'm going to click in that, and that creates our little timeline here. So a couple of quick things to look at the timeline panel here. Right at the bottom we have a slider which allows us to actually zoom in and zoom out of our timeline here. So if I zoom in really close, you can see we're actually going frame by frame. So that's really important to look at. At the moment I only have the background layer here, layer 0, and as you can see here it says layer 0. Each time I create a new layer, it will create a new layer in the timeline. These by default will be 5 seconds, so you may need to change those, or you definitely will need to change those, otherwise you're going to have a very boring animatic. Also, please note here on it, when we scrub our timeline across here, if I create a new layer, it will create from where that is. So, important one just to keep an eye on as well. I'm going to delete those layers now, and let's have a look at a few other things. We've got a play button here. We do have some other options here. We've also got our frame rate down the bottom right here. Over here we have our timer, and if we double click on that, we can actually choose to go to a particular time. So over here on the far right, this is our frames, next is our seconds, next is our minutes, and then finally our hours. Now our frame rate's 30 frames per second, so for every second there are going to be 30 individual frames. This can be a little bit heavy. This is based on whichever format you initially chose, so HDTV 1080p. I'm going to drop this down, so I'm going to go to this little icon here, I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go all the way down to set timeline frame rate, and this will bring up this panel here. I'm using multiple screens, so it's occasionally popping up on the wrong screen, and you can see here's the frame rate there. I'm going to do the drop down here, and I'm going to drop this really low. I'm going to take this all the way down to about 10 frames per second. Now, the only reason I'm really doing this is I am trying to save memory. So when this ends up processing, I'm not looking for something really high end. It's merely something to get the timing and the framing right for the shots. So 10 frames per second is going to be a lot easier to render than 30 frames per second. If need be, I can do it at 30 frames per second, but it's just a little caution. So let me hit OK. And there it is there. So it's still going to be 5 seconds, except there's only 10 frames for every second. Alright, next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start importing in my my actual storyboards. And as I start doing that, I'm going to start putting them as individual layers, and each storyboard is going to be an individual shot. So here's my timeline here. There's nothing in that, and I'm going to start building that straight away. So let me just jump out of this, and I'm going to access my storyboards here. Let's jump into my Finder, and on my desktop I have my storyboards for animatic, and I've got 2 of them here. I'm going to open them both with Photoshop. I'll give them a few seconds to open. Now these are really quite simple. You can see up the top here, here's my animatic, and here are my 2 storyboards. Now this is only this is actually only 3 shots, but these shots are quite complex, so I've had to do them in multiple frames to try and get the idea across. So let's have a quick look at these just to get an idea of what's happening. As you can see, they're very simply drawn. We've got some basic description of the action here. Scene 1, shot 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. You can use your own conventions for this. But let's have a quick look at what's happening in the shot so we can get an idea of the elements that we need. So start off, we're in outer space, we crane down through the stars, we reveal a beacon with a flashing light, great, and then we slowly start dollying out. As we go to the next part, we reveal a astronaut with a tether heading towards the beacon. We keep dollying out, and a spaceship starts appearing as we get further and further away, and then finally the full reveal of the ship, the little astronaut down the bottom, and our little satellite or beacon that has got a little flashing light, needs replacing. It's damaged. And next one, we cut to the interior of, or command center inside the spaceship. We do a slow dolly in to the astronaut at the helm there. And then once we get to a close-up, he lifts up a drink or food item that has to be drunk through a straw and has a sip. And we hold on there for a few moments. We then cut to, or we might even do a crossfade to a airlock door with a little window in it, and it's got a little open close gauge on there. And as we start dollying in through there, we get closer to the window, and as we pass through the window, we see the interior of that room, and it's got a big claw that moves and is about to drop a new satellite into space. The little hatch opens, claws release, and the satellite drops down. So that's kind of the intended shots there. Essentially 3 shots this could be all done in, but multiple actions. So got about 8 frames for that. Now what I do need to do is get these shots into my animatic. So a couple of ways we can do this to try and save a bit of time on this is, rather than clicking back and forth up the top here, what I can do is rip off that board there. I'm going to reattach that. The other way to do this is to go to Window and go to Arrange, and you can actually choose to have stuff like 2 up vertical, which is actually not a bad one to do. And this allows us to see 2 shots at a time. So here's my shots here. I'm going to go into this one here. I'm going to zoom out, Control minus, and I'm going to grab these shots here. I just want the elements, and what I actually want to do is, this is all one scene, so I'm going to just do this all as one big long shot, and I'm just going to grab one of these as a reference one. I'm probably just going to use this one here as a reference, kind of the one that shows a bit of everything in this. So what I'm going to do is grab my marquee selection tool, rectangular marquee selection tool, shortcut is M, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle, or grab a rectangle around that layer. Now there it is there. I'm going to go Command C, and then I'm going to click into this panel here and go Command V, and that will paste it into that document. So there it is there. It's quite big in comparison because this was created in a larger format, so I will need to transform that down. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to jump back into the next shots here, and let's move that one across, and I'm going to do the same process. So I'm going to grab my marquee selection tool, M, and clicking on there, I'm just going to drag across that shot, Command C, click back in here, Command V, let's jump back in here, and I'm actually going to just continue doing that. So I'm going to drag that across, or I could recreate it, Command C, back in here, Command V, and continue through. So I just want to get all my shots in there. This is actually, realistically, this is probably actually only 3 shots, so these are essentially going to act as placeholders, but I might do these just as individuals, and we can always sort of cut them together just to give you an idea. Copy, paste. Alright, so once that's done, I'm actually going to turn these off. I know what's going on, so let's turn those off. So as we can see, we've got all of our shots now in our animatic here, or the starting of our animatic, and here they all are all in layers. Now they're all quite big. I'm going to zoom out again, Control minus, and I'm going to hit Control T to transform. You can actually see the transformation controls around that layer. Now I need to get all of these shots to fit the canvas area as I want to get them at this point, and if you do happen to bring something in and it's smaller, one of the things you really need to make sure is that it is actually the size of the canvas where these blue lines create that box, or bigger. It can't be smaller. It's going to mess up our image, our animatic. So let's keep that in mind. I'm going to cancel that, and what I'm actually going to do is I am going to grab all of these shots because they are all there, and because I just copied and pasted them, I'm just going to shift select those and Control T, and depending on which version of Photoshop you're using, they might have your link already on between your width and height. I turn mine off because I've been using Photoshop for quite a while and I'm used to the old-fashioned way, but now by default that link is usually on. I'm just going to grab that corner, but you just want to make sure you constrain your proportions like so. Now, looks like the storyboard is a slightly different format to the animatic screen in this process, but we can make it work. I might just stretch out my canvas a little bit like so. So there they are. They should all be in there now. And I'm just going to get rid of any layers that I don't need. So here's all my shots. And they're going shot 1 at the bottom. It's the first one I brought in. Shot 2, shot 3, shot 4, shot 5. And there they are there. And I'd usually recommend renaming these, but at the moment, layer 1, layer 2, because there's nothing else in there at the moment, I'm going to be quite happy with that. Now we need to actually get these all in order because at the moment they're all just stacked on top of each other. So if I run my slider through, there's my 5 seconds. Not really going to work. Now this is actually quite simple to do. Just make sure you get a decent zoom out so you can move these around. And I'm going to go layer 1, I'm going to leave at the bottom. Ignore that for now. And I'm just going to click and drag that and drop it in. Layer 3 behind layer 2, layer 4, and just keep dropping and dragging. And this is why we need to sort of, zoom out, otherwise you're going to end up having to keep shuffle it across. So what I end up having is each shot, as I mentioned before, by default is going to be 5 seconds. And as we scrub across, we can see all those shots start appearing. Now this is where you actually want to sort of reference your storyboard template. You want to look at your shots and figure out how long each shot is going to look. Sorry, I just changed the background color. And I'm just going to get these back in line. All these new buttons in Photoshop. And we're going to actually look at getting these adjusted time-wise exactly the same or close to the time that you stipulated in your storyboards. So to give you a quick idea, let's open up this one again. And I've just guesstimated the times here. Shot 1, we start off with the satellite, we crane down, we see the satellite blinking there. About 3 seconds for that, and then another 4 seconds for the astronaut, another 4, 8, 12, so about 15 seconds for that shot. It's quite a long shot, so there's quite a lot going on. So I'm going to say roughly about 15 seconds for that. Now to change the time in your shot, you need to make sure that your scrubber is over that shot, otherwise you won't be able to do it. Is you want to move your cursor to the end of that timeline, and then you should see this little changes from an arrow to the sort of line with 2 arrows, and as you can see there, a little pop-up comes that says end 5 seconds, duration 5 seconds. So this is telling us how long this shot is and where it ends. And as I start dragging it, if you drag up or down, you can see it start increasing or decreasing. So I want to get that to about 15 seconds, which is about there. And you can see that now stretches that out. So it's a very long shot, but it's going to be quite involved, as you'll see when I actually finish creating it. Cut to the next shot. We do a slow pull in of our character there. I think I had that at about 3 seconds. So clicking onto that layer and grab that and start dragging that down. You can see duration there and 3 seconds. It will tell you the end time, so you know how far along from the beginning that you've got. And then it has a sip, and I'm going to make that another 3 seconds. So a lot of this you just sort of have to time out in your head. We then do a, actually I might make that one a little bit longer. Let's do it about 4 seconds. If it is getting a little bit finicky, don't forget to zoom in down the bottom. And then we do a pull in through the door. Let's say I want to about 4 seconds or so for that. is getting a bit finicky, so zoom in. So I've got the lights changing from open to close, and then as we're doing that, we're pulling in. Crane carries the satellite or the beacon and then drops it, let's say, I don't know, 8 seconds. So these are quite long shots. We're doing, it's not like fast dialogue or action. We're just really trying to draw the audience in for this. And I'm going to have a quick run through this. I'm just going to press the play button. It's going to be extremely boring because there's nothing happening in here. And as you can see, this starts playing through. So I'm hitting the space bar, but you can press play here. Things to look at here is you can see the time going here. So we're at the 10-second mark. And also here you can see the FPS, the frames per second. This is all in green, which means that this is actually running to the current time accurately. So what you're seeing is accurate. If this starts coming up as red, essentially what it's saying is that it's doing a RAM preview and the computer's just struggling, and it'll start indicating how many frames per second it actually is running at. So if you do see that red coming up, just keep in mind that it's probably not the correct time. It's probably taking a bit longer than actually experimenting. So this is a good indicator, but some of these shots are quite complex. There's lots happening in them, but at the moment they're just static storyboards. So you want to make sure that you do get your times correct for this. So before we go to the next spot, these are the key things I want you to make sure. Bring in your storyboards individually. Transform them so that they are at least to the edge of our screen or larger. Make sure you have this bounding box done up using the guidelines. These are all essential. Once you've done that, stack each individual one after the other in order from beginning to end. Then adjust the duration of each one to how long it wants to be. Now it's important that you do all of this first, otherwise it's going to get really, really complex to fit later. Once you've gone through and you're happy with your duration, and you can check at the end here, go, okay, well this is totally going for about 36 seconds, great, from beginning to end. And once you're okay with that, you go, okay, great, I'm ready to proceed to the next stop. So make sure you do all that. Once you're at that point, I'd recommend saving that out. And I'm just going to Control S, and I'm going to call this animatic 1-0. And I'm saving it as a PSD, obviously. And let's just hit save on that. And next step, we are going to start doing a little bit more animating and getting our situation to work a little bit better. And what we're going to do here is right click on our layer, go to convert smart object, and as I do that you can see that the smart object icon appears in the thumbnail of each layer. And as we scrub through, here we go, you can see there's our layer. If we double click on that thumbnail, it will open that layer in a new window.